I just came back from dinner with my mom and we talked about something that happened literally 20 years ago. And while we did, I thought it'd be a good story to share here. Now, before I can jump in, I need to sketch the surroundings a bit. At the time, my mom was 43 and I was 18. Also, our relationship wasn't very good. Admittedly, that was pretty much my fault. I was a rebellious teenager then, and important for the story, I was caught up in the metal scene, among other scenes being the vocalist of a black metal band, those inhuman screeches. It's actually a trick. Next to that, I picked up a liking for weed. My mom stood out less in attire and manners. Although, and yes, this is important too, she likes the color blue and has long blonde hair. Behind our own house stood a house owned by, I'm Belgian, my terms might be a bit off in this, Social Services, an organization that provided sheltered living, so there lived 3 men, Abe, Bart, and Carl. Abe and Bart were obviously in need of help, but completely harmless. Carl was even in that company special. Not at first sight. He was a rather diminutive guy who dressed well. But, well, if people are really detached from reality, you just have to look at their eyes to know. Now, Carl might have been heavily medicated, but he was still batshit crazy. I don't know really what the problem was. I'm not a psychiatrist, but in a nutshell, he suffered religious delusions and was convinced that some people were angels, demons, or characters from the Bible. I didn't know that, but in hindsight, let me give you a rundown of how I looked when I returned home from a show. Long hair, a beard, a rather muscular build, a black frock like monks wear, studded leather belt and arm bracelets, a big pentagram around my neck, and I went full out corpse paint. So in short, after seeing me walk around like that a few times and hearing the frequent arguments my mom and I had, Carl became convinced I was a literal demon, and here comes the catch. My mom was the Virgin Mary. Blue clothes and long blonde hair, remember? Whom I wanted to abduct in hell. But he had his medication and wasn't a danger to anybody. Until on a hot summer day, I got a visit from the police because I had gotten into a fight. So what did my mom do? She invited the cops to sit in the yard while they talked to me. To Carl, that was somehow the straw that broke the camel's back. The cops leave. I succeeded in convincing them I just happened to be near the fight, and my mom and I start arguing. At the same moment, Carl starts skipping his medication. A week later, I have a show in a neighboring city, so around 3 a.m. I return. Because I wasn't that stupid, I didn't drink or smoke before getting in my car, but I was planning on doing that afterwards. In the car were 2 of my bandmates, Andres and Quentin. I go inside, my mom is fast asleep, and I get a few beers while they sit in the garden. Smoking had to happen outside, and it was pretty hot anyway. We sit, chat, smoke, and drink. All is great until Carl decides to act. What the heck, said Andres. He pointed at the hedge at the end of our garden. All 3 of us, extremely intoxicated by then, watch Carl dressed in a white gown and with an aluminum circle on his head, wrestle himself through the hedge. What do you think you're doing? I said. Begone, forces of evil, he shouted, waving at us with a rather large cross, like as long as my arm. At that moment, I admit we didn't know what to do. If you think about it, he probably took that as a sign that his cross worked. So he runs to my open back door. My cue to run behind him, screaming at him to stop. He enters my house shrieking that he's coming to save the Virgin Mary. Now it gets really weird. My mom wakes up from all the shouting. She wore white PJs and had all of her hair loose. Carl must have thought she descended from heaven, so he bolts up from the stairs, falls to his knees and starts praying. The 3 demons behind him are, strangely enough, not repelled. I grab him by his scrawny neck, totally ready to go medieval on him. I mean, we had our problems, sure, but this is my mom we're talking about. He jumps up, wrestles himself free, and manages to hit Quentin in the head with the cross. Andres and I back up, look at each other, and nod. Carl is going down. Stop, says my mom, as loud as she can. She walks up to Carl, takes his hand, and says, I think you're seeing this wrong. He looks up to her and starts crying. I mean ugly bawling. He tells her he wants to protect her from us, and points at us. My mom goes, I know, but that really isn't necessary. I whisper to Andres to call the cops downstairs and stay there. Look, he's just a kid that likes to dress himself up. I don't really like it either, but it's a game. She motions at me and I lose the frock, the belt and stuff. Underneath, that stuff was heavy and it got hot. I was only wearing my boxers. I wish I had a picture. Carl is still on his knees crying. My mom is standing before him smiling. Quentin is still sitting against the wall holding his head, and I'm standing in my boxers. I mean, you don't have to be crazy to get confused by that. Carl takes a deep breath. But you're the Virgin Mary. "Hey, I'm just a nice lady," she says, "and they're my son and his friends, and you're Carl. It's all okay." He looks at me, then at my mom, stands up and grabs his cross. He looks at it and says, in an almost childish voice, "Didn't I tell you?" After which he makes his way downstairs, through the garden, through the hedge, and back to his own place. Somewhat later, the cops show up. We explained everything, and the next day, Carl moved out. That was the story about the one man I don't want to meet again, and how I learned that my mom is, underneath her appearance, brave and really smart. To conclude, 2 days later, his social worker paid us a visit, telling us what happened in Carl's mind leading up to that night, repeating over and over how happy we were that we were unharmed. I, by then, my usual bragging teenage self, said I would have dealt with him. The social worker shakes his head. Apparently, Carl told him he didn't only have a cross, but he also had a huge knife under his gown. A few years ago, I worked at a small local pet store during college. I was one of 2 women who worked there, and we didn't generally work at nights together. This store kind of specializes in saltwater fish and reptiles in particular, so it wasn't too odd to have a newbie reptile or aquarium people or people looking to just learn some more for actually getting a little companion. About a year into me working there, this one man would come in and start asking questions about the bearded dragons in particular. I humored him the first couple times he came in and answered his questions for an hour and a half to 2 hours each time. But then he just kept coming in, not buying anything, not looking at other animals. Refused to talk to my other coworkers sitting right next to me. He was definitely a dude with a creepy vibe, but after about the 3rd time this guy came in and questioned me about the bearded dragon mating habits for an hour, we all started getting weirded out. He knew my schedule because we were such a small store. I would call my friends and tell them to come hang at the shop while he was there because he was just so persistent about talking to me. And only about the bearded dragons with the occasional, "Do you have a boyfriend?" or pickup line. I told him I wasn't interested each time and told him that I did have a boyfriend, even though I didn't. At first we were all pretty forgiving, chalking it up to social awkwardness. But it started getting scary when he'd come in, look for me, not find me, but he'd find my car, with significant damage at the time and decorated. Very obviously my car back then. And just hang out outside the shop. My boss and manager started telling me to hide out in our back employees only rat/mouse room when he'd come in. My friends were weirded out. I was getting uncomfortable around him, and my coworkers were actively trying to curb his enthusiasm for coming in. I ended up quitting that job. Around a month later, I'm watching the news with my dad, and oh man, we were in for a surprise. This same guy had been escorted off his ex's property in a local town by police. Came back to the house the same night and murdered her. When she didn't show up for work, her coworkers called for a welfare check. The police get there, and he answers the door and tells them his name is Zeus. It most definitely was not his real name. He lets the police in, and they found her in the bathtub on a tarp. They also found bloody plates, silverware, and pans in her sink. He had cooked and eaten parts of her heart, liver, and brain. He's still waiting for trial in our state, and his interviews/clips of news people questioning him while the police are escorting him to court are just bonkers. He tried to claim demonic possession at one point. He had previously murdered 2 people and been released from prison before moving to our area. I'm a late 20s male, around 6'4" and around 180 pounds. Sometimes too nice to my friends. I tend to do favors for my friends even if they seem pretty ridiculous, as long as it's not terribly out of my way. Most of the time it's, "Help, I'm drunk and need a ride home." Well, one night at like 1:30 a.m., I get the call. A very, very drunk friend of mine, Claire, is begging me to come pick her up and give her a ride home soon. The bar is closing soon and she's too drunk to drive home. The bar she is at isn't too far from my house, about 10-minute drive, but the issue is that she lives like 35 to 45 minutes on the other side of town. Claire has been extremely nice to me in the past, and I did owe her a solid, so at about 10 to 2, I grab my keys and concealed carry, and leave the house. I get to the bar at around 2:05, and she's sitting outside on a bench by the doorman. I pull into the parking lot, which is pretty empty since the bar is now closed, and I assume that the cars remaining are the workers who have yet to leave. I get out of the car and start walking to Claire, who was kind of slumped over. I was hoping she wasn't passed out drunk, and when I got to her, the doorman asked me if I was her ride. I told him yes and showed my ID for proof, and what he said next was of some concern. He kind of pulls me in and says, "I'll leave out here where I interjected," and just write what he said. Hey, I was supposed to leave when we closed, but I have a strong feeling your friend was roofied. She's been on the porch drinking all night, and some guy kept hovering around her. I assumed it was a boyfriend or whatever, but she never turned to talk to the guy. She was either drinking or chatting with other girls around her. Well, anyway, she was chugging her last drink, and when she came up to me, she told me that you would be coming to pick her up, and she asked me if she could sit by me. She told me she felt very dizzy and sick. I told her of course, hoping she just drank too much, and she passed out right after she sat down. After that, I couldn't see the guy anymore, but I didn't want to take any chances. So visibly concerned, I thanked the guy profusely, and he even helps me carry Claire to my car. Midway through carrying her, she's kind of coming to, like someone just waking up after a surgery. That really groggy, not knowing where they are, talking kind of nonsensical talking. I don't remember exactly what she was saying, but I'm sure if I wasn't on high alert about her possibly being drugged, it was some funny stuff. So we get her buckled in. I thank the guy again, and he just hopes she gets home safe. So now, hoping my friend is only stupid drunk and not drugged, I start driving to her house. The whole time I'm trying to keep an eye on her and an eye on the road. She's now snoring asleep, which puts me at ease a bit. But about halfway to her house, my fuel light comes on. Cursing the fuel economy of a sports car, I pull into the next gas station. It's one of those small gas stations that doesn't have a 24-hour store, so I'm on extra high alert while I start to pump gas. The gas station is about a block from the freeway and right at the corner of the intersection. The street itself is pretty dark with lonely lampposts shining very pitiful lights at large intervals. Get that really dead feeling inside, like this place is just abandoned. To give an idea of positioning, because this is important, the gas station is at the corner of the intersection and the storefront would be facing south, and we were right in front of it where the pumps were. The east would be where there are the air pumps for tires and parking spaces, and the north would be a diesel fuel pump right behind the store, accessible from the street behind the gas station. I drive a Corvette, so the filler is on the rear end of the car, and I'm leaning against the rear, looking around. To my left, I hear this weird metallic scraping sound, so I turn and see this guy, about 20 feet from me, come around the corner dragging a long metal pipe on the ground. I immediately sense that I'm in a possibly dangerous situation now. The guy looks almost possessed, but he's not looking at me, like he's trying to look into my car. I'm on the defensive, but hope I can get him to leave, so I call out, "Hey dude, everything alright?" Without looking at me, he answers back, "You took my girlfriend from me. I'm here to take her back." Now he turns to look at me, and he's got blood in his eyes. Before he begins to take a step, though, I start yelling, hoping it'll get him to back off. I'm a little over 6 feet tall, and not exactly skinny, but not exactly bulky either. And I have a really deep voice. "Hey, back the heck off, man. Turn around and leave, and no one has to get hurt." He takes a step towards me, clearly unimpressed, so almost automatically I pull my handgun from my inside the waistband holster and draw a bead on him. "Hey, back the F off now. You don't have to die." I start yelling louder, pretty sure my voice cracked because A, I'm scared shitless. No amount of self-defense classes and time at the range prepares you emotionally for this kind of situation. B, even though I carry, I'm really against violence and killing someone is not something I want to do. C, did I mention I'm freaking scared? Anyway, in a panic, this weirdo throws the pipe at me. It whizzes by, thankfully not towards my car but to my right, and I dive behind my car to cover. I have no idea if he has a gun himself or what, but I was going to put some kind of cover between me and him, and by the time I kneel up and aim over the rear of my car, he's booked it. I hear a car door slam and tires screech, and he launches off the curb on the east side of the lot and is tearing down the road, swaying all over the place. In my own panicked hurry, I pull the pump out of the car, screw the cap on, and tear out of there myself. Claire, however, is still passed out in my car, and now I'm afraid because I'm convinced she's been drugged and we were followed by that guy. Me being more concerned about her earlier and keeping on the road, I must have not noticed I was being followed. The whole way back to her house, I'm wary of any other car that's behind me. I'm also driving very aggressively. And when I get to Claire's neighborhood, I circle a separate block that's not hers, 4 times to make sure no one had followed me. When I was satisfied, thinking I wasn't being followed anymore, I pulled up to her house and tried to shake her awake. She's doing that groggy waking up stuff from before, but now she's able to get up. I'm able to walk her. Thankfully, I was worried I was going to have to call an ambulance if she didn't wake up, and I get her keys from her bag. I managed to walk her inside, and at this point she's kind of coming around, asking me what's going on, where she is. I tell her she's home and to get her to lie down. She's completely lost looking, and her eyes start welling up. She clings to me and starts sobbing. She's still very out of it, but I'm guessing she realized something bad was going on or attempted on her. I was able to get her to lie down and get her to sleep. I wrote a note for her, which pretty much said, "Hey, I'll be in the next room. We're going to the hospital in the morning to get you checked out." Fast forward to the morning and she's sick as a dog. And after she expelled some demons from her stomach, I drove her to the hospital where she got tested and treated. I still shudder to think what might have happened had I not my CCW with me. I do know martial arts, but that's not something I want to take against a crazy person with a pipe. Claire still doesn't remember much from the night, except calling me and wanting to sit next to the doorman. My advice for anyone: either be with friends you trust when you go out, or at least be vigilant if you're by yourself. That night could have ended badly in 1,000 different ways, but thankfully, even luckily, everyone made it out safe. Many years ago, I got my first bachelor apartment. It was a basement unit in a 2-story walk-up on the edge of my town's campus, so naturally, it was an electric mix of wealth and poverty. I was somewhere closer to the latter. This place was tiny, with a mattress on the floor against one wall. I could lie on the floor, feet against the edge of the mattress, and touch the far wall with my fingertips, so there wasn't much space. The kitchenette was to the right of the apartment door, and there was a tiny bathroom in the back. One night at around 4 a.m., I heard growling, and because my apartment was so small and I was so close to the apartment door, and also because it was so dark, it sounded like the growling was inside my apartment. It sounded like there was an angry, hurt animal growling on the other side of my living room, and in the pitch black, that was truly terrifying. I lay there under my blankets, terrified. The growling went on for almost 30 minutes, and would get louder and more angry, then taper off a little, then louder and angrier and higher pitched, like a wail or a shriek. Then stop. Finally, I heard the scratching on my door, and the growling stopped. There was nobody in my apartment. There never was. It was my next door neighbor, and apparently she believed she was possessed. She did this a few more times. She would lie on the floor outside my apartment door in the hallway, out of sight from my peephole so I couldn't see her. I could only hear her growling and speaking something that wasn't English, and always well into the night. I had no phone, and ours were the only apartments in the basement, as the rest of it was for the furnace and water heaters and storage. So when I wanted to go out, I had to pass her apartment, which started becoming a bad time. Every time I needed to leave home, it got to the point where I had to tiptoe past her door because if she heard me, she would rush to her front door and start banging on it, shrieking and cursing until I was far enough away that I could not hear her. I spoke with the landlord, and he said that she was fine as far as experiences with her were concerned. She was a lovely, quiet woman who mostly kept to herself. Of course, because we were the only tenants on that floor, nobody else heard what was going on, so it was her word against mine. About a month after speaking with the super about her, she set fire to her apartment cooking toast. She just put the bread on the burner, forgot about it, and set a small fire. Nobody was badly hurt, but the building was evacuated, and she went to the hospital with smoke inhalation, but was released the next day. When they went in to assess the damage, they discovered that she had written on every square inch of her apartment walls in small, neatly written cursive handwriting, vaguely religious or scripture-style verses, apparently in an attempt to keep the demons contained. I moved out at the end of the month and never looked back. I heard through a friend that she was diagnosed with severe schizophrenic disorder and some other things, and was put on a heavy course of medication to deal with it. To this day, I wouldn't know her if I passed her in the street. I never once saw the woman who became feral and lay growling and shrieking outside my door. I only heard her, and she scared the living crap out of me. Up until junior year of high school, I flew mostly under the social radar and stuck to my status as a nerd girl, but when I was 15, I joined varsity cheer. My school's cheerleaders weren't popular by definition, but everyone kind of knew who we were because we were on the announcements, performed at pep rallies, and generally engaged with the students a lot. I made a lot of friends that year, and some of them happened to be the cool kids. For a while, I thought this was my long-awaited karma payoff for the years of bullying I'd suffered at their hands. I even developed a crush on one of them, a crush that the junior cheer captain herself volunteered to help me pursue. Homecoming is kind of a big deal where I'm from, and I began to fantasize about my crush asking me to go with him. I'd heard rumors he was planning a dramatic proposal, and as homecoming season approached, I became more and more sure I'd be his date. The junior cheer captain, who was close with him, kept dropping hints that I was right. One day at practice, she asked me what my favorite candy was, and I knew it would be so my crush would know what to give me. You can imagine my surprise when, after an exhausting theater rehearsal, I walked into the parking lot and was confronted by a guy I'd hardly spoken to asking me to be his date. My theater friends all applauded, assuming I was overjoyed. I saw both my parents in the parking lot recording the whole surprise. But most importantly, the cool kids I recently befriended were standing right there behind him, egging him on. I didn't understand why, because he wasn't popular at all. In fact, he was known to be kind of creepy. The junior captain was laughing, encouraging him to give me the box of my favorite candy he was holding. She definitely orchestrated the whole thing. I didn't really know the guy, but I didn't want to humiliate him in front of the coolest kids at school, so I faked a smile and rolled with it. I promised myself I'd deny him later in private so he wouldn't be so embarrassed. Afterwards, when my parents excitedly asked me how I felt about the ordeal, I explained how uncomfortable it made me. I said that I got creepy vibes from the guy. That didn't fly with my parents. My mother accused me of having expectations too high, and my father demanded to know, not for the first time, if I was secretly a lesbian. I had never had a boyfriend or shown much interest in dating. To make his case stronger, I'd just become best friends with the only openly gay girl our school had ever seen. Long story short, I knew that if I shut down my date, I'd effectively declare war on my parents. However, I played my dad's protective instinct against him and persuaded him to let me friend zone my date. After all, he knows how high school boys think, right? I texted my date that night and explained that I only saw us as friends but would still be happy to go to homecoming with him. He was very polite about it, although I could tell he was interested in me romantically. It seemed we reached a deal until the next day at school when one of my cheerleader friends referred to my date as my boyfriend. I corrected her and told her that we were just going to homecoming as friends. She seemed confused and told me my date was telling anyone who could listen that I was his girlfriend. A few more of my friends approached me with similar comments, and I confronted my date about them. He denied all involvement and suggested that it was just a rumor. I reminded him that we were just friends and I had zero romantic interest in him, and he said he understood. I got a call from the junior cheer captain. She pretended to be sweet and nice, but I was still annoyed that she led me to believe my crush would ask me to homecoming. She began her attempt to persuade me that I was wrong to friend zone my date. She said that she'd spent many afternoons planning his proposal with him and that she knew he was kind of creepy from afar, but he was actually very sweet and caring underneath all of that. I said, if you were such a catch, then you should date him. Annoyed, she dropped the sweet act, and she told me that I had to date him because he liked me so much and he'd gone to so much trouble to ask me to homecoming. That I had to give him a chance because he'd gone out on a limb for me. I told her she was wrong and I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to do, and I owed him nothing. I ended up hanging up on her soon after that, but that was just the beginning. Starting the next Monday, he would corner me in the hallway and give me a rose that he held in his teeth. He usually did so between my 6th and 7th periods when my path through the hall crossed his. I was deeply uncomfortable with this and told him so, but he wouldn't stop. I took different routes to escape him, but the junior cheer captain and her posse made a point of tracking me down so he could find me elsewhere. Every time he did this, everybody in the area would treat it as a sweet romantic gesture, despite my obvious discomfort. Wouldn't any girl be lucky to have a boy so devoted to her that he gave her a rose every day? He was still telling everybody I was his girlfriend. The final straw for me was when he walked into a class he wasn't in to find me and give me my daily rose. My teacher, who was friends with the junior cheer captain, let this happen. For weeks afterwards, she would ask me about my day every day. When he came in, I told him to get out and leave me alone. His feelings were clearly hurt, and he left looking like a kicked puppy. My classmates started calling me a cold hard bitch. It didn't matter what I had to say about him. I was an ice queen, refusing this sweet boy's advances. Everyone in the school had decided that I was in love with him, and nobody cared what I had to say about it. My crush, who was part of the popular group, joined the junior cheer captain in pressuring me into returning my date's feelings. At every event, the cheerleaders were present. My date would push his way to the front of the crowd. He would go to great lengths to get my attention. At football games, he would even wave a flag in the student section so I'd look at him where we were cheering. The other girls would make comments on how endearing he was when he waited in the parking lot by our bus back to the school just to hug me and tell me how great I did. I didn't know what else to do other than just let it happen. I had only recently ascended to a position of visibility. If I conflicted too hard with the cool kids who were dead set on setting me up with this guy, I could be an outsider all over again. I hoped that if I just kept ranting to my real friends about how creepy he was and publicly let him do what he wanted, it would all blow over soon enough. My school had a 15-second attention span, so some scandal had to one-up me sooner or later. The truth emerged, as usual in the locker room. It turns out the junior cheer captain had been telling him, during their afternoons together, that I was into him. He'd come to her for help announcing his crush to me. And she'd gone a step further and convinced him that I felt the same, despite the fact that I didn't even know his name. She lied to him for weeks prior to the homecoming proposal, and when I told her that was wrong, she didn't care. She told me I should be grateful because everyone was starting to think I was gay. My best friend, the lesbian who was starting a gay revolution, and I, inspired, spread a rumor that we were dating. After all, everybody already thought I was gay, right? But my date wasn't fazed. In fact, he told everyone he just turned me straight again. Ew. 3 weeks after he asked me, it was finally homecoming night. Thanks to cheer obligations and a complete coincidence involving a switched backpack that left me without my dress, I ended up only attending the dance for half an hour. My date awkwardly stood on the side of the room while I danced my heart out to Mr. Brightside. I almost felt bad for him right at the end when the junior cheer captain appeared like a summoned demon to suggest that we slow dance at the next opportunity. Thankfully, I escaped that one by walking to the DJ and suggesting that he play Footloose. My date walked me onto the parking lot to wait for my mom to pick me up. While we waited for her to drive around, which took entirely too long because she still hoped I'd stop making a fuss and just date him, he asked me out. Obviously, I politely declined. He quickly stammered that we could go with a group of people like the junior cheer captain and my crush. I denied him again and made it clear we were only friends and I wasn't interested in romantic endeavors because I was too busy. That was actually true though. I was in all advanced classes, varsity theater and cheer, and worked part-time. A few days later, a teacher eloped to Vegas, and nobody cared about my love life anymore. My date and I were distanced again by classes and activities and work. It appeared that everything was going back to normal. That Friday at the football game, my crush asked me to sit on his shoulders for the alma mater, kind of a romantic thing at my school. Overjoyed, I accepted, and I hoped that this was the beginning of a new chapter for me. I ignored the frantically waving flag in the stands. On Monday, my date stood on a chair in his second period class and announced that everyone should be wary of my crush because he would steal your girl. I heard everyone buzzing about it a few hours later when someone called me a jerk. Again for breaking my date's heart. I knew I was being dramatic, but I decided to not go to lunch that day, terrified of running into him, and I'm so glad I didn't. Later I saw on Snapchat that my date had carved my name into things around the school with a pair of scissors. Tons of people were demanding why I'd hurt him like this. He did it in the middle of lunch in a crowded cafeteria, and somehow no administration noticed or cared. The school was buzzing. My date was a broken-hearted victim, and I was the evil, secretly gay bitch who wouldn't give him a chance. I got so many dirty looks. By fifth period, I was ready to just walk out, but my good girl instincts kicked in, and I decided to tough it out for 1 or 2 more hours. Around that time, I got a panic text from one of my cheer friends. While she'd initially been insistent that I date the creepy guy, she apparently changed her mind after that lunch incident earlier. She told me that my date, who was in her 5th period class, was going off the rails. He had started out by saying that he wanted to kill someone because I wouldn't love him. This had escalated to saying he'd kill my crush for lying to me and stealing me away. Finally, he started talking about how he knew where I lived. My parents had given him my address when he initially wanted to ask me to the dance at my house, and he would make me pay for wronging him. I knew that after 6th period, our paths through the hall would cross. Since the beginning of this ordeal, the school had cracked down on students getting outside, and my alternate route to escape him was no longer an option. My class was at the far end of the hall with nowhere to go but into the central hub, and he would be coming from the other end of the hallway towards mine. I was stuck up a chimney, basically. Desperate, I texted the junior cheer captain to finish what she started and tell him that I was not and had never been interested in him. She'd made this mess, and I would make sure she had to clean it up. She said she'd go to the counselor, but she didn't know what else to do. This was way beyond her control now. For the first and only time, I skipped class. I hid out in the theater hall and waited for 7th period. I got a few texts during the passing period that my date was waiting for me by the bathrooms. There was a little alcove right there where you can't see people coming around the corner, and the thought of him hiding there, waiting for me to walk by alone, horrified me. Right before 7th period began, a few of my classmates burst in, cackling and proclaimed that my date was coming down here after to school to kill my crush. They thought this was hilarious, but judging by the look on my crush's face, this wasn't a joke to him anymore. Our teacher brushed this off as a typical theater drama. Pun fully attended. I watched the clock and tried to not cry, knowing that by the time the bell rang, my date would be outside, waiting for me and my crush to emerge. That day ended up being a work day, so my crush and I were able to escape the classroom and hide out elsewhere in the theater hall to get away from him. He opted for the black box theater, and I went for the lighting closet. Obviously, I didn't witness what happened, but my best friend filled me in afterwards. Allegedly, my date had turned up 3 minutes before the bell rang and stood outside the classroom, where we couldn't see him when we opened the door. He told everyone standing around that he was ready to have a knife fight with my crush. We don't know if he actually had a knife fight or not, but the idea that he might was enough to terrify me. His arm was wrapped in paper towels that he was bleeding through. My best friend told him my crush and I were gone, but he didn't believe her. He stood outside for 25 minutes until the administrators began walking through to make sure no one was in the school who shouldn't be. My date wasn't in the theater, so he wasn't allowed to stick around. That night, I texted him that not only would I never date him, but I could no longer even see a friendship between us. I sent him a number to a hotline and told him to get help. Finally, I told him that he needed to learn what no meant, and I never wanted to speak to him again. He responded that he was sorry and asked if there was anything he could do to fix this. I told him no. I don't think he learned the meaning of the word after all, because the same pattern repeated itself a few months later on Valentine's Day, the next year at homecoming senior year Valentine's Day, in prom, but those are other stories. I've since graduated and gone off to college hundreds of miles away from him. My family back home moved from the address my parents gave him. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not gay. My crush on the other hand came out a few months later, and we were friends for the rest of high school. I'm working on handling romantic endeavors in a healthy way, but he got in my head. He was the first person to ever show interest in me. Ironically, the last time I saw him was my first and only homecoming game after graduating, but this time I had true friends to defend me when he predictably tried to pull some weird stuff with me. The worst part, looking back, was somehow being at fault for everything. To this day, people from my high school reference the whole ordeal as, that time you wouldn't date the poor shy kid. I can't even appreciate red roses anymore. True crime was and is one of my favorite genres of entertainment. I loved reading about serial killers and stalkers and things like that because none of it had ever touched my life personally. But since this has happened, it's become much less rooted in fantasy and I'm looking out for red flags. During my sophomore year in college, I was a volunteer teaching assistant for an on-campus international student program in the Northeast. Basically, it was the last step students had to take to get a certificate telling potential schools and employers, I can speak English really well and here's proof. The students tended to come in groups selected by programs in their home countries. So one semester we might have a lot of Chinese and Brazilian students, and the next we'd have Korean and Saudi Arabians. This particular semester there were a lot of people from Mexico, and they all lived in an off-campus housing complex called the Suites. Now my position, as I've said, was volunteer. I'd have some friends from the program in the past, and they knew I wanted to teach English abroad, so they put in a good word for me with the staff so I could get some practical skills and experience under my belt. Being as informal an arrangement as it was, I had no qualms about forming personal relationships with the students. In fact, a few of us are still good friends today. I wasn't a very outgoing person at the time, and though I had many friends, I hardly ever drank and really had never been to a party. Hearing this, some of my students who threw parties every weekend insisted that I come to the next one. The party was fun. It comprised almost exclusively international students, which was nice because I knew most of them. I got really drunk and had fluent conversations in languages I had very loose grasps on. Everything was going great until a few of us retreated into a friend's dorm for some air. Checking their phones, a few girls realized that Pamela had not returned from Main Street yet and no one could get a hold of her. Pamela was a 19-year-old Mexican student and had gone to a local eatery after lessons that day in order to meet one of the teachers for a private tutoring session. The session was scheduled for 5 p.m. and should have not gone longer than 7:30. It was 11:30 at this point, and the girls were understandably worried. I asked which teacher the tutoring session was with, and they told me it was with Charles. Immediately, my skin crawled. There were about 5 teachers at the facility, and Charles was by far the sketchiest. He was around 40 years old, half Japanese American with short but visibly flat-ironed black hair that partially covered his glasses. He honestly looked like a stereotypical weirdo. I tried to hop around between classrooms on a weekly basis to get a feel for different teaching methods, but I cut my week with Charles short because he was just so creepy. The way he spoke to his students was condescending and mildly inappropriate, commenting on a girl's blouse or telling weird stories about his own wild college years and how they ought to take a page from his book. All this in the middle of class, mind you. Additionally, he would always get uncomfortably close to Latina students, grabbing their shoulders, touching the smalls of their backs, and even grazing their breasts occasionally. He creeped me and everyone else the heck out. After sharing some creepy Charles stories, we were all freaked out and ready to do something. Last anyone had heard from Pam was at 5:15 when she texted and said her phone was going to die, but she would figure out a way home when tutoring was finished. It was the middle of winter in the northeastern US, and a blizzard warning was in effect. The diner she was at was a 3-mile walk from the suites, and a few girls suggested she was bunkering down until the warning let up. The problem was that it could be days. Another theory was that she got lost trying to find her way home in the snow. None of us had a car, so we told a few of the boys and they formed a search party and started walking down Main Street. Just a few minutes later, they returned with a snow-covered Pamela in their midst. Being from Mexico, none of these people had properly packed for a brutal winter, so when they found her, she was freezing and soaked to the bone. After a hot shower and relaxing for a bit, she told us in Spanish what happened. When she arrived at the diner, Charles was nowhere to be found. She waited for 40 minutes and was just about to start walking back, knowing a storm was coming, when he finally showed up. He apologized and said he was just upstairs and had dozed off. He lived in the upstairs apartment, you see, and asked if she wouldn't mind taking the lesson up there where it was more quiet. Being a shy, somewhat reserved person who spoke little English, she complied. When upstairs, he started asking her all sorts of questions about herself. Most she could barely answer, and when she stumbled, he would laugh and scold her for her mistakes. He tutored her for about an hour, then made them both dinner. It was 7 p.m. by now and Pam wanted to leave, but he told her to eat and that he would drive her home afterward. It was pitch dark and the storm was picking up considerably. "You know, a girl like you shouldn't be walking home alone at night," he told her. Pam was nervous, but she knew he was right and she wasn't confident she'd even be able to find her way home in all the snow, so she stayed. When they finished eating, Pamela went for the door, but he stopped her and asked if she would do him a favor. He went to his bedroom and beckoned for her to follow. Hesitant as she was, she peeked into the room and saw a full photo studio set up against the wall facing the bed. He told her to stand in front of the light so he could take a few photos and then he'd take her home. Frightened and confused in a country she was unfamiliar with. With a man she thought she could trust, she did as she was told, and after a few minutes, the request got darker. He showed her pictures of other girls, mostly college-age Latinas whom he had taken pictures of in various positions, in states of undress, and asked her if she would do some of those poses. She said no and that she didn't want to do that, so he pulled a pair of boxer shorts and a tank top out of his top drawer and tossed them at her. "Here, put these on then. Just a few pictures and then we'll go, I promise." She went into the bathroom to change into the clothes he'd given her and just sat there, cursing at her dead phone and on the brink of tears. For 5, 10, and 15 minutes, she couldn't remember how long she sat there until he started knocking at the door. "Pamela, come on, I was just kidding. Come out of there, I'll take you home now." Not completely trusting him, but knowing there was no other way out of the situation, she exited the bathroom, and he apologized for making her feel weird and offered to drive her home, at which point she grabbed her things, said she was fine walking, and left. He didn't even go after her and didn't try to stop her. She did, in fact, end up getting lost and walking around the town for over an hour before the boys found her a few blocks from the complex. We urged her to tell this story to the police, but they said technically no crime was committed, so she told the head of the program. He accepted it a little too easily, as if he almost expected it, and we later found out that this was not the first time something like this had happened. We already knew it wasn't because he had pictures of other girls, but an especially ugly story found its way to us. Apparently the previous year, a South American girl was really struggling in class and received tutoring from Charles. After 2 or 3 sessions, she stopped going despite her grades not improving. She became exceedingly closed off and stopped going out altogether, often missing class. After a few weeks, she dropped out of the program and flew back home. No one knew her well enough to ask why, but they all had a sneaking suspicion it was because of Charles. After hearing Pamela's experience, the program immediately dropped Charles as a teacher, which just proves that this was not the first complaint against him. This last bit may just be a rumor, but I heard from a pretty solid source that after Pamela filed the complaint, the police checked him out, and Charles wasn't even his real name. Turns out he'd been using fake information to get teaching gigs around the country for the past 5 to 10 years, as he was actually a registered sex offender. Just an hour ago, I was driving a friend of mine home from the hospital. She is elderly and went to the hospital for a fall a few days ago, and unfortunately to get her home, we had to drive through a part of town that is a little sketchy, but not usually too bad of an area. It was pretty late, so the roads were nice and quiet. It's not unusual at all to see homeless people, tweakers, or just straight up weird people walking around this late in my city. They weren't too bothersome though, and if they do approach, they will leave if they are rejected or ignored. At one point, we stop at a red light just 5 minutes away from her apartment, and a guy starts crossing the street in front of us from the left. Usually it's no big deal, but the second I noticed him, there was just something off-putting about him. Before I could say anything, my friend said, "I have a bad feeling about that guy." When she said this, it only confirmed how I was feeling. He stopped right in front of my car, stared at us, then just started yelling at us for seemingly no reason and pointed his finger at us and throwing up his hands. I couldn't even understand what he was saying because the windows were rolled up and the radio was on. We were both pretty scared at this point, and I was ready to hit the gas if things escalated. I didn't want to run him over if I didn't have to, but I was ready. The thing that stuck with me is that he didn't look like the typical tweaker I usually see on the street. He was dressed pretty normal in a clean tee and jeans and seemed well groomed. Just an average looking guy, probably in his 40s. And after a good 15 seconds or so of yelling, he kept walking, and I thought he was going to finish crossing to the other side of the street and leave us be. But no. Instead, he suddenly sprinted to the front passenger door where my friend was sitting, and pulled the handle to try to get in and even hit the window. I decided in that moment to blow the red light for both of our safety. I felt safe running the light because the street was completely dead. I looked in my rearview mirror after running the light and saw him sprinting after us, but of course, we were easily able to get away. We took a longer way home than usual after that just to be safe. We were both fine, just pretty shaken up still, but safe at home. My friend was more upset than I was, which is understandable, and honestly that pissed me off the most. She asked me to stay while she showers and get ready for bed, so I'm currently hanging out on her couch writing this. I'm not sure if this guy was drunk or high or just had a really bad day and needed to take his anger out, but I wasn't going to stick around and risk our safety to find out. I have never been in this situation before, and I'm not sure if I made all the right choices. I'm just extremely grateful I have a habit of locking my doors as soon as I get in or out of the car. This happened literally yesterday. I honestly don't think I've fully processed it yet. Me, female 19, and my friend, female 19, were biking home at around 3 a.m. on a dimly lit street right next to our house. On one side was forest, pitch black beyond the tree line, and on the other side was a bunch of houses. From far away, we spotted a red car with one broken headlight parked ahead. As soon as we got closer, the car started moving, passed us very slowly, then made a U-turn and drove past us again. Even in the dark, it was obvious we were two girls alone at night, so we put some space between us and them. As soon as we got to the sidewalk, we noticed a girl standing partially hidden behind a white truck, watching that same red car. The car was creeping towards her. Then she ran off, running up the sidewalk and turning into a bike path that cuts through the forest. Immediately, two men got out of the car and followed her in, so we decided to follow and try to help that girl. I live next to the forest. I know how dark it gets. No one walks that path without a flashlight unless they have a reason, and even then it was 3 in the morning. The slow footsteps, the bucket hat guy, the way the car disappeared. It all just felt wrong. We reached the path entrance and saw the red car just waiting there. The driver, a guy in a white bucket hat, looked straight at us, then sped away far into the street. The path was pitch black. We walked in, a fence on one side and dense forest on the other. That's when I noticed slow, deliberate footsteps keeping pace with us. Definitely not an animal and heavy enough to be a person. We kept walking on until my friend spotted the girl ahead of us. She shone her flashlight and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" The girl looked over her shoulder, stared for a moment with this unreadable, creepy expression, and then took off running deeper into the darkness. At that point, our survival instincts finally kicked in. We turned and sprinted back the way we came, screaming as we ran. We called the police as soon as we got back to the street. Within minutes, 3 police officers arrived. They asked questions, and one ghost car drove down the forest path. About 5 minutes later, they returned and showed us a photo of the girl. The cops said they found her with one man, which made no sense because less than 10 minutes earlier, we'd seen her completely alone and running away. They also said neither of them would identify themselves or explain why they were there. They brushed us off, saying we could go home now. As we walked away, we saw 3 people get into a police car, which made it even weirder, because earlier they said there was only one guy with her. So, was there really someone following us in the woods? I keep thinking, what if this was trafficking bait? Maybe the only reason they didn't go after us was because we started screaming. Throughout this story, I would like for you all to please keep in mind that I was 20 years old and very naive. You might think I'm stupid, and I guess I was. Probably lucky to be alive, and man do I know that. I kick myself whenever I think about this day, trust me. I just wanted to get some other opinions. Maybe I'm wrong about him. Okay, so about 20 years ago, I was walking down the road in a not so great area. It was summertime and I was dressed appropriately for the heat. Shorts and a tank. I'm very thin and was downright skinny then and got mistaken for a sex worker more times than I care to admit. This may or may not be important to the story. So anyways, I was walking to pick up my son from daycare and I was going about my way. A truck full of men started to catcall and follow me. They turned around several times to yell at me out of the window and I was getting nervous about it. I was passing a gas station parking lot and a man not much older than myself stopped in a nice car and asked if I would like a ride. He didn't seem scary and he was attractive, so I said okay and I got in his car. So I get in the car with him and he asks me where I'm going. I tell him it's about a mile straight down the road I'm on. He starts going out the wrong way and just tells me he needs to turn around. I pay little mind. He starts to ask me about myself, so I tell him. I was escaping a DV situation and was staying in a woman's shelter nearby. I was telling him how closely my activities were monitored and that I would pick up my son any minute. I think this may actually be what saved me. At some point I notice he takes another wrong turn, but I don't know the area at all, so when I point it out, he says he's taking a shortcut or something and I just go back to talking like an idiot. Then I get a whiff of something. I now know that smell was death. Decomp. I know this for sure now. I did not then. I turn around and look in the back seat looking for spoiled food or something. The car is absolutely spotless. I bring up the smell and he brushes it off and changes the subject. But for some reason, the smell just started getting stronger. My dumbass brings it up again. What is that smell? He says he doesn't know. Probably something he forgot to take out and has gone bad. When I tell you guys, there was not a crumb in that vehicle. I'm baffled. But eventually, he drops me off safe at my destination. He doesn't tell me his name, ask for my number, or give me his, and I don't think much of it until much later when I smell that smell again. But this time I know what it is, and it triggers the memory of the guy in the car. This was probably 2005 in Covington, Kentucky, and I'm sure that him being aware that not only would I be missed, but also I would be missed quickly and my movements would be tracked very specifically, was the only reason that I made it back out of the car that day. This happened a few nights ago. I'm a 25-year-old woman, 115 pounds, and I was out with my thoroughbred, Shane, doing fitness work on the cross-country course. If you guys don't know what that is, imagine a huge area full of fields, ditches, woods, etc., with jumps placed strategically throughout design to test horse and rider stamina, and we were getting ready to head in from an evening of hard work. It wasn't dark, but it was slowly getting there, prompting me to head in for the day. As we were walking around the area we had been working, my horse started refusing to go near a patch of woods. We had gone by several times that evening, so I urged him forward to investigate. It was then that I heard what I believed to be a human voice. I realized somebody had been watching us the entire time. This property is on 700 acres and this section was nowhere near a road, so this person had very intentionally made their way very close to where a rider could potentially be. I did not want to startle the horse, so I calmly turned him around and began to fast walk around that patch of woods, giving it a very wide berth, with intentions of heading straight the heck back to the main barn. As I got to the middle of the field, however, Shane halted and, although by then it was almost dark, I realized something. There were people in the woods across the field in front of me too, which is where my safest exit was located. So I now have somebody in the woods, 50 yards or so behind me, and what sounded like multiple people in the woods, 50 yards or so in front of me. I briefly considered taking the other exit route, but as I mentioned before, this was very far off the road, so my immediate thought process was that they didn't walk there. Yeah, Shane and I could have beaten them to the gate, but if they had a vehicle of some sort, they could have caught up as I was opening it. We stood there for maybe 30 seconds and simultaneously came to the conclusion, if we go now, we'll beat them. We basically bolted across the field, slowed up slightly to cross a ditch in the woods, the one they were trying to surprise block me at, and flew to the gate just beyond it. I jumped off, unlatched the gate, and didn't even stop to mount the horse. He's very tall and I'm average height. I just grabbed his reins, and together we bolted to the barn. Within 20 yards or so, we were hearing distance, and I started hollering, "There's people out at the entrance, guys. Come here." And as soon as I started making a fuss, a four-wheeler started up from just behind the gate and hauled ass away. A police report was made, and the next day there was evidence found of 2 four-wheelers, so that makes sense since I was seeing people basically surrounding me. We aren't going to stop riding out here, but the barn owners are taking some precautions and won't be out there alone or at night anymore for a while. They may have just been teenagers looking to scare a rider, but either way, not cool. and the fact that they were trying to sneakily block my exit route, I can't imagine the intentions were pure. I'm just thankful for my hypersensitive horse, because without him forcing me to pay attention, I may have never noticed the people, especially the ones in front of me moving in the woods. They were trying to be quiet. Shane was a good boy that day,